Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And brought to you by the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EVT Educational Productions. And as usual, we're pre-taping the Thursday before our Monday air date. And Bob, we're still in the throes and the aftermath of Hurricane, now downgraded to Tropical Depression Harvey. So I guess we could, in a sense, recap a little bit of the history of the storm and the reaction to it and the reaction to the coverage of it. So basically on Thursday afternoon late, what's going on, or what jumped most to mind?
Well, as far as the rainfall is concerned, I mean, like you said, we're taping Thursday in anticipation of Monday. The rain has gone from Houston, but the water is still rising in some places. It's minor recession in some other places. But what's happening is that people who were stuck in since the storm started are venturing out, and basically there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to shop, there's no one to talk to, and the law enforcement is still pretty much tied up. So we're in sort of another phase of the disaster where
rescue still going on.
Yeah.
People are theoretically, I understand now, today, Thursday, the Houston Police Department and Fire Department have decided they're going to actually do a block-by-block search to make sure folks who may have been trapped have all been rescued.
Right.
So.
And they do a curfew the other day
Yes.
just to make sure that people stayed off the streets and just minimize the number of people looking around, and so it's still bad. And what little I'm getting back from people in the vicinity is just they don't know any more than you and I in New York know just watching TV.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of semi-postmortem, because this is definitely still not over. They're not out of the woods, because there is still rain falling down on parts of eastern Texas and into Louisiana on Thursday, right? So,
right.
And there's still major flooding damage. There's a lot of finger pointing going on. There is a lot of second guessing going on. I know I saw some online comments on a particular story about the mayor of Houston being second guessed for having people stay in place.
Right.
And that may turn out to be a good decision. It may turn out not to be a good decision. It will depend on what the death toll becomes. Speaking of death toll, as of Thursday, how many lives have been lost?
I didn't hear the latest update.
Okay.
Was it in the teens?
Last I heard there were 8, but that was like between Wednesday and Thursday.
Because remember, we had the sudden discovery of the 6 in the van. I don't know if they had been counted in the previous count.
Yeah, maybe that's why the number 8 jumped up, because there were very low numbers earlier on, and then all of a sudden 8 came out, and may well be. I heard, and we don't even want to tell you folks without digging into the latest feed to find out.
But what's interesting, and we like to talk history, when we analyze this story, when Houston had the last major flood problem years ago, there was an evacuation of the city attempted, and apparently, we're talking dozens of people died in the transit. They died either baking in their cars or otherwise couldn't get to medical assistance or some other issue. So that the mayor of Houston knew that. He didn't want that again. So, and really moving that many people in that short, even if he had a month, moving that many people to where? And and we didn't really know the true path of the storm at the time. That was the issue. So I personally, I don't have an issue with the mayor not evacuating.
I'm not second guessing the man. Moving 5 to 6 million people to who knows where. That's a logistical decision that would have had to have been made, I'm thinking, in conjunction with the state government, the governor, and Homeland Security and whatever North Command or whatever the federal government emergency preparedness military command, because they actually, as a result of 9/11 and then a couple of hurricanes, including Katrina, they actually designated a particular military command that would be working in tandem with the civilian government, and that was the General Honore, which we actually should talk about General Honore because he was doing some finger pointing. Was quoted as saying North Command with Fifth Army was supposed to pre-position. I'm quoting General Honore, paraphrasing. When this storm was listed as a Category 5 that was going to hit the Houston area, his take was North Command should have already have been called in by the state and local government as opposed to trying to just rely on the state National Guard. This was his take that I heard him pitching on, I believe, CNN.
See, now that's something that didn't happen in Katrina because we had things like military tents and whatnot available, but no one thought of putting those out there.
Yeah, I think Katrina was the outgrowth of Katrina. Was but Honore, my recollection is Honore and the Army came in as the last resort to get, after the Great Job Brownie, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I believe after Great Job Brownie and the total debacle that was the Katrina response, I believe that's when they went to the federal government and Honore and his group came in to take charge of coordinating and cleaning up that mess and getting it to a more stable evacuation thing. And he was quoting the fact that they had 240 helicopters and a whole bunch of other, quote, federal government, Army resources that eventually got in to deal with Lake Pontchartrain coming slap out of the lake bed onto New Orleans and that massive flooding. So the reaction to the finger pointing, and he did say I'm being critical because based on Katrina and based on the fact that we set up this command, we should have pre-positioned and waited and blah, 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 blah. That's what he was saying. The pushback against his comment, because I read the comments on I guess it was the CNN website or a Huffington Post, whichever aggregated his appearance on CNN, all the comments were, how could the guy who screwed up Katrina, which was a debacle, which they blamed on George Bush, be talking about, we didn't do that in Katrina. Well, if you look back at the time zone, yeah, you screwed it up initially, and he came in and tried to help clean it up, and out of that came your decision to have a unified command that would help coordinate this stuff. He claimed, what he said in this quote was, they stopped. They needed to bring in the big dogs, and they needed to bring in the big dogs early, not late, not after the fact. That's what he was saying.
Now, Brown was on TV just a few days ago. They called him.
I missed that. What was he saying?
Well, he actually said, and I mean, he didn't go back into his own issues, but he said one of the key things he said was that you have to get out ahead of it. I mean, he said whatever the politics are, never mind, but on anything like this, you need to get out ahead of it.
That's what Honore was saying. You needed to pre-position.
And just what you said about the pre-positioning, because we have aircraft carriers and whatnot going into the zone now. We have all sorts of military equipment going in.
He's saying that was the command that was supposed to pre-position, but they can't move unless the local governments ask them to come in.
Now, we as did the media ask the right questions in the beginning? Because in the old days, you would have had newspapers with reporters that covered the military. And nowadays, so many reporters have been fired. So many papers don't have beat coverage of this issue or that issue. You're almost turned into sort of a press release coverage. And not if, knowing that going in, could the media have asked that question the day before?
I don't know, because I saw a report on either MSNBC or CNN where one of the editors of one of the local papers in the Houston, Beaumont area was actually stuck in a motel because he had to leave his home and leave his place of work or whatever because of the flooding. And so he was actually stranded in a motel, but he was actually giving the local blow-by-blow from that motel to whatever news organization he was communicating with. So it's too early because we don't really have a take on just how devastating these floods are going to be, because guess what? High water is still relatively high, and the receding and the recession of the water is not coming as quickly as the flood came in, because there were lots of reports by people about how quickly the water rose, how surprised they were. And even though they planned to get out,
Right.
they got caught.
Right. And when I look at some of the pictures of the flooding, yeah, you couldn't have prepared. What was the total, like 48 inches?
I saw something like 48.5, and there were areas where I believe Beaumont or somebody else got 50 point something.
Okay.
So
just to put it in perspective, if we were sitting in it, we would be looking. It would be up to our eyeballs right now.
4 feet. That's 4 feet. 48
With us
inches.
sitting.
48 inches is 4 feet of water.
Yeah. So as we sit here, you'd be looking at our eyes.
And guess what? That's just the rainwater coming down.
Right.
Now you're not talking about the rivers flooding and the dams being released,
Right.
so that you've got water level rooftop high. People are sitting on their roofs. People are one guy on the PBS report last night. He was either the military National Guard key officer for that particular area. And he was talking about the phenomenally dramatic rescues that his units were actually engaged in, 5 and 6 people clinging to the tops of stop signs, because you know how high those stop signs are. They're like almost 8 feet up, and 6 people, and they all have to be released, rescued by a helicopter. And he was saying that was happening not just in the daytime, but at night.
Right.
And his point for that was, we had not done any nighttime helicopters evacuation. And so this was a first, but it all went smoothly.
But you can imagine the angst.
Okay, so what that says to me is, now the military is going to have to practice some nighttime helicopter evacuation, just so their people can be experienced, because evidently all their practice has been daytime stuff. Well, it's interesting. That's the humorous part of that. But you know what? This is seriously, seriously tragic stuff, because people are losing their lives. Thank goodness the number hasn't been anything like Katrina.
And it's sort of like the funeral effect when somebody dies, and then you go to the funeral, you have your family around you, and for a few days you can take it. But then you're alone, and whatever denial you have wears off. You know, the water goes, in this case, the water will go down, people will see their homes and realize they don't have a thing left. There was a good story written by somebody who they thought they could write it out. Mm-hmm. Then it reached the top of, say, where the kitchen surface would be. They were sitting on their kitchen table and whatnot, feet dangling in the water. It just kept rising, and they stood on top of their washing machine. It kept rising. Mm-hmm. The washing machine tipped over. Mm-hmm. So they're at the top of their cabinet, and it's still going, and they're like, we're in trouble.
We got to get out.
And they saw trouble coming, but nothing like that. Mm-hmm. And to hear those,
those kinds of stories will tell you.
And it's citizen journalism that's bringing it out, covering it, getting reporters in there. What reporters we have left that haven't been laid off or fired is hard. Yeah. And we were talking before we went on air about the one black lady who started swearing at the CNN reporter.
The lady with the 5 kids or 7 kids or whatever it was, I forget.
And she had basically walked in. She was cold, she was hungry, and she was wet.
She had just gotten a shelter.
Yes, and somebody was holding a mic, and she answered a few questions, okay, but then you can see the stress. It just got to her. So I don't blame the reporter or the person, but when you mix oil and water at that moment, sometimes you get something like that.
We've been out on breaking news stories where things are really sensitive, with
you
people
and I have
losing.
Both done that.
I've been there, and there comes a time when, though you got to cover the story, sometimes it pays to just take a step back and give people some space and take attack it from a different angle.
Right.
That was when I saw that woman, when she lost her patience. When I saw that clip, I said that reporter should have been a little bit more in tune with her surroundings and her circumstances. Even though he knew he had a great, here's my just rescued whatever, he should have had a better wavelength to take a look at where she was and what her circumstances may have been.
Right.
And after she answered 2 questions,
It should have
been enough.
But the thing, and I was thinking of that as the clip went on. It's like, okay, I have 20 seconds to fill. So, that's like the mindset of the TV person.
You just got to back off.
But you have to tune in and say,
yeah, you know what?
Go get a sandwich.
Do what you need to do.
Yeah.
Folks, you can tell, blah, blah, blah. You go back and you do your,
I mean, I remember a case where I had to cover a story of a police officer who had been shot. It was the first police officer who had been shot in this. South Milwaukee is where it was. Yeah. So I went down and they were having some kind of a event to honor the police officer. The mayor didn't want to talk. The people didn't want to talk. But then I made it clear that we're not here to, this isn't advertising, that we're not showcasing anything. We just want to get, your feedback on the officer. And, so I was tried to be as professional as I could. Mm-hmm. And one by one, everybody had a good story. And I said, do you really want to say that? I don't need to put that in. And once they understood that I wasn't there to exploit the situation, everybody wanted to sit down with me, and I actually
talk to you. Mm-hmm.
I give myself no props for being.
You became a father confessor or a brother confessor,
sort of like that.
I had a similar reaction, and this time I wasn't in the field. I was actually on the assignment desk at ABC News, and major national story breaking. There was a POW coming back, and he was from Brooklyn, and basically, once all the news organizations realized that one of them was right in our front yard, they started bombarding this woman. I think it was his mother or his wife. I'm guessing it was probably his wife. And I actually happened to make like maybe the 3rd phone call. And she almost broke down and she said, I said, I know exactly what's happening to you. Your phone's not going to stop ringing because you don't have an unlisted number, and you take it off the hook, then you're going to have a problem because
right.
I said, my suggestion, here's what I'm going to recommend to you. And this is what you do. You call, and I told her who to call, whatever. And you say to them, you are going to do one press conference, one thing at one time. And please, everybody, come to that, do what you need, get what you want, and after that, please leave me alone. And she said, I want to thank you. Who do I call? I said, well, I'll try to put the word out to our cohorts, etc.
Right.
And then, whatever. And she said, you know what? I'll do that. But if you want, I'll talk to your reporter one-on-one. I said, really? You don't have to do that if you do the press conference.
Right.
She said,
yeah.
No, I thank you for having the courtesy to explain what's going on so that I could at least try to deal with this. So I'll try to do that. And she actually, there's another part to that story, but that's another time.
Right. So
but that's the kind of professional courtesy and human interaction is what you need in those kinds of situations. You have to realize that other person is a human being going through a lot of stuff, and if you don't have that sensitivity. Speaking about sensitivity, let's talk about the media coverage of your president's visit to the flood area.
There we go.
What did you see about the reaction to his tweet about I was able to see some poor people who did X, Y, and Z, and then the pushback was immediate?
See, there were a number of tweets. I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
There was one where he referred to how he was able to go do something with the affected people, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, he wasn't even in
but
the
he wasn't there.
area.
That was the part of the problem.
Okay.
That's why the pushback came immediately.
Okay. I mean, it was. First of all, it was intelligent for him not to go into the danger zone because you're taking resources away from everybody else to protect him. Okay, 1 point for that. But for you to say that,
I was down there.
I absorbed the feeling of the
pain
community.
and suffering. I was there, right?
Right. He didn't even get his fingertips
distant
wet.
removed, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are other, that's that's why I give some other politicians credit for walking in there with waiters and showing up in bad weather and getting mud on their hands and saying they were actually there.
Yeah.
That's addressing the people. That's really getting in there. But he came, he went, and that was it. And
Yeah.
I give him credit just for trying as president to bring a little, just sort of letting them know that he's there. Help is on the way. But
I saw a clip of the helicopter, the parade out to the helicopter, and the president and the first lady, and I saw him, and he looked like he was almost prepared with the jacket to go to some area. And even though his wife had the jacket, when I saw those stiletto, Malone Blanco, whatever, I said, well, she ain't going to be walking in any flood areas.
Right, exactly.
So I was not surprised that he never ended up anywhere near the flood zone.
Right.
Because his wife was not prepared to be walking in any mud and water, and that was plainly evident.
See, even Nancy Reagan, who used to get all sorts of criticism for the same thing, would have known better than that.
She would have had her boots on.
Yeah, she would have known much better than that.
She would have had waiters.
Yes.
But anyway, because the coverage is going to be unfolding, and I certainly hope that General Honoré and his prediction that because of the lack of the more of a quote amateur hour response, that the death toll doesn't rise.
Did he say that?
Yeah, he said that.
Oh.
He said this is amateur hour. I'm hoping that we don't get it's a hope against hope, because when you look at those floodwaters and you look at all those weird rescues and all that stuff, the death toll is going to go up. And so
nobody, first of all, nobody could have predicted, this bad. So we've had other storms where they said, "Oh, it might be this bad," and then it petered out.
Yeah.
But
this corkscrew thing, come off land, go back on land.
Right. That's the issue.
Yeah.
When I was a reporter and Milwaukee broke its record for the biggest rainfall in one day, it wasn't because the storm was that big. It's because the storm showed up and sat there. It didn't go anywhere. It's like when you have a storm, you have a sponge that moves along, and you squeeze the sponge as you move. But when you're in one spot, you do all the squeezing in one spot. That's what happened in Houston. All of that Gulf moisture got dropped, and I was in Houston 4 years ago. I'm sure it's not going to look like that again for another.
It's going to be a
five, 6, 7
recovery.
Years. Yeah.
So we
have
got about 6 minutes,
5.5
minutes. So just to segue back a little bit to the previous show, when we were talking about the historic roots of these white supremacists and the neo-Nazis and the KKK, and we were talking about some of the reaction, including our president talking about, we segued to him talking about the dealing with Muslim terrorists by the World War I general, and I made the mistake of calling General Pershing General Patton, so I need to correct that. But the first of the show was not just on the Muslim tweet, anti-Muslim tweet by your president. It was on basically his defense of, there were some fine people marching with the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis. And so, but the reason why those people were there was supposed to defend the statue of Robert E. Lee that was being supposedly going to be removed. And so there has since sprung up a major, major debate across the country on what to do with these Confederate statues. And of course, your president's been running around saying they're destroying our history. What next? Maybe George Washington and maybe Christopher Columbus and whomever, whatever.
Right.
But I keep trying to remind people, and other people have done so as well, when Washington, who owned slaves, and Jefferson, who owned slaves, and Hamilton, who didn't own slaves and set up the Manumission Society to free slaves, when those founders went into action against the British, they were trying to found a country, which they successfully did. And Robert E. Lee was actually part of that Union Army that was the defense, the descendants of those individuals who fought to establish the country.
He was part of the infrastructure.
Yes, sure. But he resigned his commission from that army to go head the Confederate Army. And of course, the Confederate Army was a rebellious army that was actually trying to destroy the Union, destroy the country that Washington, Jefferson, and those other slaveholders had helped found. And so when you talk about setting up monuments to people who try to destroy your country, then that's a different horse in a different cart than the people who tried to found the country. And the fact that you're trying to destroy this country because you want to own other people, because no matter what they try to tell you in revisionist history, the Civil War was not fought against states' rights, folks. It was fought to preserve slavery. Of the number of 13 or however many different reasons they listed for secession, 13 of the 16 or 10 of the 13, I lost the exact number, was all about slavery and all about perpetuating slavery. So they fought that war, and that's that, quote, lost cause that has been perpetuated by Hollywood and other myth makers. But guess what? The cause was a cause to destroy the Union. And so they lost it, and they've been fighting to regain that victory ever since. And so they put up these monuments to their lost cause. And I'm using that phrase because when we were researching this 2 shows ago, because I thought we were going to do this 2 shows ago, the headline I came across from a very interesting online source, which was Jezebel, which is an online publication. And this was a Jezebel story that was written on 15 August. Headline, Confederate monuments aren't history, they're a cheap cultural memory. And when they say cheap, they actually mean cheap, because what they were saying was these were mass-produced things that were cobbled together almost like assembly line factory stuff. And it's a long article, but I'll read some key parts to it. Actually, while I'm looking it up, you might want to tell us a little bit about the New York version of these.
So we only have a minute, so go
real
ahead.
Quick.
Yes.
All right. The Boone and Confederate monument building dates largely to the 20th century, decades after the Union prevailed. Quote, the monuments of bronze and stone are messengers from the past, relaying to us the nostalgic perspectives of the white women, Confederate veterans and descendants who commissioned them. Art historians Cynthia Mills and Pamela Simpson noted in their critical volume, quote, Monuments to the Lost Cause. The 2 found that the majority of Confederate monuments that still pepper the landscape of the South were commissioned by white women, quote, in hope of preserving a positive vision of antebellum life, end quote.
We'll probably get back to this, but we have about 25 seconds.
We need more time. We need to dig into this because this is an ongoing controversy. But this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And we are also on YouTube
at Media Watch EVT.
And we'll catch you the next time. And who knows, maybe somebody will fade us to black and take us out right on time.